In 2017, the Matthews family received a photo of a frozen body of a young man on Everest. They thought the body could be their son Michael Matthews, one of the youngest British climbers to ever take on the tallest mountain in the world. Michael's journey was anything but straightforward or easy. His very survival would be tested until he would achieve his goal, then suddenly disappear. But what would happen after his disappearance is unlike any story that I have covered to this day. This is his story. This entire story actually begins with a magazine, an article about climbing Mount Everest in a men's lifestyle magazine in the late 1990s. Jamie Everett dropped this article off on Michael Matthews' desk while at work and simply told him they should climb Everest. It didn't take long for Michael to look at his friend and coworker before saying, "Yeah, why not?" Michael Matthews was not an ordinary person with an ordinary background. His father, David Matthews, was a self-made millionaire and had instilled intense drive and dedication to his children in everything that they do. This was represented more so in Michael, maybe more so than any other of David's children. You know those people in your life that are just naturally good at everything, without even really trying? Well, that was Michael. By his early 20s, he was a young, good-looking guy who was very fit and had already started out on a successful career as a trader in London. This is when his friend and coworker would bring up Everest because of a magazine article, and Michael would never look back. He had some experience climbing small peaks, but he had never taken on a challenge such as Everest. Obviously, he knew the tallest peak in the world was dangerous, but if Michael was successful at summiting the peak in 1999, he would become the youngest Briton to climb the mountain at the time. The challenge and history books. This is what drove him. 8,848.86 meters, or 29,031 feet. That is the height of the tallest mountain in the world. There are obviously many dangers on the peak, and this is only magnified for inexperienced climbers. Just check out my other videos and you will see this represented in so many cases. But there are two areas on Everest that are particularly dangerous on the West Buttress route, and both are important to today's video. The first being an area just above base camp, the Khumbu Icefall. It is known as the Sherpa Killer, as the ice is constantly moving. The second is the balcony, which is located in an area above 8,000 meters. Imagine being utterly exhausted. You can hardly breathe because the oxygen is a third of what it is at sea level. Each step feels like you have cinder blocks chained to your feet, yet you must still traverse up rocks and small ridges. All the while, the summit seems so close, as if you could reach out and grab it, but it just never gets any closer. It is a mental battle above all else. This is why Everest is one of the hardest mountains in the world to climb. When David heard about his son's ambition to climb Everest, his first thought was that Mike could not do this alone. David would decide to join Mike and Jamie and would ensure that his son had the best support that he could buy. David would eventually settle on OTT Expeditions and shell out $40,000 for one place on their 1999 expedition team. To prepare for the climb, the trio would train on mountains such as Aconcagua, but this is where David discovered that due to a surgery he had on his carotid artery, it prevented him from climbing at altitude. He was forced to drop out, but the successful businessman would interview each of OTT's guides to ensure they were suitable for his son. In April of 1999, Mike would fly to Nepal and begin the 8-day trek to Everest's base camp. Mike made it look easy, and oftentimes would be hours ahead of the other climbers, waiting in the next village for them. During this time, Mike would quickly develop a friendship with another member of the team, Dave Rodney. Dave would take several videos and pictures of Mike during the expedition, along with being one of the last few people to see him alive. After reaching base camp, the expedition team would set out on their first real tests, the infamous Khumbu Icefall. It is considered the most dangerous part of the mountain, for good reason, as there have been close to 50 deaths within the icefall. But Mike made the giant crevasses look easy as he traversed confidently over the ladders set up by the Sherpas, as if certain death did not lay just below him. The groups would continue acclimatization trips up to Camp 2 and 3 before resting. Acclimatization trips are important for climbers because it allows allows their bodies to become adjusted to the higher altitudes, so that when they do attempt a final summit push, their chances of success are significantly increased. But it was during one of these trips that the first complications of the expedition began. Jamie, Mike's co-worker and friend, began developing cerebral edema, which is the swelling of the brain increasing the pressure in his body due to a lack of oxygen at the higher altitudes. His legs stopped working first, and then he was unable to sit up. They had no choice. They would place Jamie in a game-off bag, which encases your body like a coffin, with the only view being a tiny clear window. You pump the game-off bag with oxygen to simulate a lower altitude, and they are typically only used in life-threatening scenarios. Jamie would be stuck in the bag for 5 to 6 hours. When he got out, he thought to himself, "If I stay here, I will die." And that was the end of the expedition for him. Mike would reach Camp 4 on May 11th, and almost instantly they would go to their tent to lie down and rest. Camp 4 on Everest lies on the tip of the South Col, just under 8,000 meters. Famous mountaineer Nims Persia describes it as a place for survival mode. Everyone is worried about their life. They don't really care about anything. That is why they call this area the death zone, because life simply cannot sustain itself at this altitude, even with supplementary oxygen. The expedition would rest in the morning of May 12th, but there was a concern brewing around the amount of regulators and bottled oxygen they had. The climbers were supposed to be provided with Russian oxygen systems, but while they did have the Russian systems, it was partnered with UK and US bottles, which didn't fit the systems.
What a day this has been. Boy, did I ever suck wind. If it wasn't for my good friend, Mike Matthews, with a little pep talk, I don't know if I would have made it, buddy. How you feeling, pal?
I'm feeling just fine.
Oh, yeah?
Slight cough because of the dry air, but I'm sure Dave's soup will make everything all right.
The final summit push would begin the night of May 12th at 10 p.m. Dave would be climbing with his guide Dennis, while Michael climbed with his guide Mike Smith. Dave and Dennis were a little quicker on the upper slopes and would soon press ahead of Mike as they all made their way towards the balcony. Dave would eventually summit Everest and look down at the clouds below him, claiming it was unlike anything you had ever seen before. During his descent, he would come across Mike at the base of the Hillary step, still on his ascent. They would lock eyes and Michael would shout out, "Did you make it, buddy?" with Dave responding, exclaiming, "I sure did, and now it's your turn." After Dave made it down to the south summit, he turned around to get one more glimpse of Michael, who now stood at the top of the Hillary step, and coincidentally had turned around at the same time. They each gave a thumbs up, then a wave, not realizing that wave was goodbye. Michael would eventually reach the summit with Mike Smith on May 13th, 1999, becoming the youngest Brit to reach the pinnacle of Everest at the time. But during his descent, a storm would begin to roll in, bringing intense snowfall and fierce winds. What happened next is still controversial to this day. Michael's guide, Mike, was walking ahead of the pair on the descent. He claims it was to clear fixed ropes that were being buried by drifting snow, while others speculate their own theories. Somewhere between Camp 4 and the southern summit near the balcony, Mike turned around and saw nothing. Michael was gone. The snow made it impossible for Mike to climb back up the peak, and he waited at the balcony at a height of 8,500 meters for over an hour. Mike would state, "I was getting plastered with snow, and I tried to get back up the hill, but it wasn't feasible. I had to make a decision. Do I stay there and wait for who knows how long, and fall asleep and never wake up, or go down?" Mike would descend the peak, losing a toe to frostbite due to his time spent in the death zone.
So it's 5:15 on May 14th. Should be probably one of the happiest times of my life. Lying here, thinking about Mike. He was 22.
Typically, when a mountaineering accident occurs, the events are reviewed to ensure that there was no foul play, particularly in certain circumstances with foreigners. So when the British Mountain Guides Professional Standards Committee began their review of Michael's death, the Matthews family were convinced they would find something, but it didn't take long before all the guides in the expedition were cleared, much to the dismay of the Matthews. This would not deter them though, as the Matthews family would launch a lawsuit against the three guides and OTT expeditions. Their primary argument was that the oxygen provided was not up to the standards for the climb, and they were actually right. Sort of. It came out 2 months after Michael's death that every single client on the mountain had claimed the oxygen sets were not up to the standards promised by OTT, but every professional Western guide would say the exact opposite. David Matthews also believed that Mike Smith had abandoned Michael due to the intense storm in an attempt to save himself. OTT's defense was that plenty of clients reached the summit with their system, and even stated, "My business is tested and proven. People who use my service take huge risks. I can't afford to let them down." Although there was a problem with the new system, which linked a Russian demand valve with British tanks, he adapted the sets satisfactory. Eventually, the Matthews family would lose the case, and no legal action would take place. But this wasn't the end of the story. In 2017, 18 years after Michael's disappearance, a photo would make its way to the Matthews family. A photo that looked like it could potentially match the outfit and location of where Michael went missing. Spencer Matthews, Michael's younger brother, would launch a full-blown rescue team, hiring some of the most famous mountaineers in the world to search the upper regions of Everest for his brother's body. The entire project was filmed, and there is a documentary called Finding Michael that dives into Spencer's story and body recovery mission in full detail. Spencer unfortunately would find out that the picture was not Michael, and his attempt to search the peak would end with no results of his brother, but he was able to return the body of a Sherpa to a family in Nepal, something Spencer claimed Michael would have preferred over his own rescue, as he had a deep respect for those men. Michael Matthews still lies on the world's tallest peak to this day, most likely covered by snow somewhere on the upper slopes of the mountain, but nobody can take away the history that young man accomplished, or the legacy that lives on within his family.